Aaron Burch is the author of the essay collection A Kind of In Between, the novel Year of the Buffalo, the memoir Literary Analysis Stephen King's The Body, and the short story collection Backswing. He edited the craft anthology How to Write a Novel, an anthology of 20 craft essays about writing, none of which ever mention writing, and is currently the editor of the journals Short Story Long and Hat. He grew up in Tacoma and lives in Michigan, where he teaches at the University of Michigan, and is also the author of Tacoma, which is coming out, I believe, this month. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yeah, on February 10th.
That's
Congratulations.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just pictured a nice paper chain like we used to do for Christmas. Are you counting down with that sort of enthusiasm?
Oh, a little bit I am. It feels like the Advent calendar down to kind of your own personal Christmas that most other people don't care about, but that is incredibly exciting.
Isn't it exciting when something amazing happens and then the whole world doesn't stop for it? And you're like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
I got to be honest, with all of with all that you've done, Aaron, I really it was the post that you made where you were listening to Brad's Interiors that for some reason was the one I was like, I got to talk to Aaron Burch. This guy knows what he's talking about.
That's such a funny entry point, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's it with everything else that you've got on your resume. So, how'd you get into it? What made you think that writing was the direction you wanted to head in?
Yeah, I mean, so it pretty much happened kind of the tail end of undergrad and then after undergrad, really. I wasn't an English major. I was largely thought of myself as a math and science guy. I'm pretty, I like putting puzzles together and that sort of math formulas and whatnot, but started to read a little bit more for pleasure in undergrad, got a job at Barnes and Noble. And then it was really this collision of, when I was working at Barnes and Noble, I worked in magazines sometimes, and kind of 1999, 2000, was the big spike in popularity of McSweeney's, big spike both in popularity and in kind of cool factor. And I just opened up a box when I was unpackaging, the New Yorker and Entertainment Weekly and Cat Fancy and Surfer magazines. And then there were just these weird giant boxes that were quote unquote issues of McSweeney's, this literary journal. And I never heard of a literary journal, and was really confused by it, but pretty intrigued. And that really kind of like rolled me into discovering this world of contemporary literature by people my age or just a little bit older than me, who were doing kind of like weird, fun stuff that often kind of seemed like the on the page versions of me and my buddies goofing around kind of. And then that collided with, in undergrad, I took one communications class that taught me literally 2000 HTML. And so then when I graduated college and didn't know what I was doing with my life, and I was working at a bank and didn't really know what to do or how to fill my time or how to make myself feel productive or happy, or I remembered this one class teaching me HTML, and I had really just enjoyed building websites and thought it was kind of fun and had enjoyed the graphic design element of it. And so I built a website that became Hobart. And then that kind of, a little bit by accident changed my life.
A little bit by accident. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many moments that we all have like that, and you've managed to turn it into something really great. Yeah. Then I kind of have to sort of follow that up with the question, I love writing shorter pieces, and I just love that kind of idea of the puzzle of it, of like, how can I get this and break this down or break this down? Can I ask you a little bit more how that sort of math and science interest background kind of works into your writing?
Yeah, I think it came a little later. I think kind of early on, it was really, probably like almost everyone, if not literally everyone. And certainly, a group of early 20-something dudes, I thought myself and my friends were the funniest, most interesting people. And so starting Hobart was really like kind of at the beginning wanting to share that, right? I was looking around and being like, all of my friends are so funny. And I just kind of liked telling stories and engaging them. So my early writing was really just how do I capture on the page something that I think would most make my best friends laugh or be surprised or whatever. And I think in high school, what I didn't like about English classes was the subjectivity, right? I really liked solving for X and being like, I did it. I got the right answer. Maybe I even got it faster than anybody else in the class, which made me feel like I'd won. But then later in life, and certainly now, I do think about writing and stories more like a puzzle, and that there's not really a right answer, but you're maybe getting closer to one. And maybe what's most right is really specific and subjective and individual to you. But I do think a lot about and literally kind of do in revision, like moving pieces around and trying to figure that out is maybe my own biggest revision strategy. Is there's a lot of movement, and I think I am thinking about it kind of like a puzzle that I'm trying to get the pieces to click into place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a similar sensibility. I'm wondering, do you work with other editors or trusted readers when you are revising? Because Tim is one of my trusted readers, and he is routinely suggesting to me to rearrange pieces, or sections of a piece that I've finished, to just try it out and see if it feels a little different. Do you have someone in your corner who does that for you, or is it really just you, an army of one?
I have a couple of friends who I share work with, and we've been kind of in a informal writing group for years now. I mean, I want to say 5, which at this point in my life often really means 10. And so
yes,
they've read
exactly.
Right. It's like, oh, if something was 2 years ago, really it was 6, and you just kind of start, inflating numbers to what they probably actually are. But I have a couple of friends who I share almost everything with, and they've read, most of what I've read in the last decade, probably in early draft form. I think they are pretty rarely giving me structural feedback like that. And it's more sort of like, oh, this didn't totally work, or like, I'm curious about this, or here's where you're not going far enough or deep enough. And so it's maybe more that. I think the actual structural stuff is more on my own. Sometimes doing reverse outline exercises where I'm maybe like literally numbering either paragraphs or chunks of paragraphs, and then trying to figure out moving them around. And sometimes literally printing a story out and moving pieces around, on my bedroom floor or whatever. I think as an editor, it's, editing, Hobart for so long, and less so Had, because they're such short pieces, but a little bit more with Short Story Long, which is longer stories. One of my biggest editorial suggestions is often, what if we took this chunk and moved it up or moved it to later? And I think that's something that I'm just I think I've gotten pretty good at. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to me because, my entry point into you, and actually a lot of what I try to write now, I first kind of discovered literary journals somewhere around 2020. And then when I first read Had, I have always been in love and didn't know that there was a place for very small, like just diamond sharp pieces. It's just been such a great learning experience. Every piece that comes out on Had, just sort of like, oh, look at this interesting way of doing this, or look at how to do this. Look at this, the compression that this person was able to use to evoke these emotions. But your pieces are a little bit longer. Has Had changed your writing?
It has. And it's funny. And I can sort of back up in a minute until the genesis of Had, which sort of explains why it's often so short and weird. it's funny when you edit a journal and in the journal, maybe you're not the ideal writer for that journal. I think in general, Had is much weirder and shorter than I usually am. Although I think doing the journal has pushed me at times to get a little weirder, hopefully a little sharper in sentences, and maybe just in general, a little bit more playful, which I think is a big component of Had. That I think is always there in my writing and just kind of my life. But I think Had has encouraged and reminded me kind of the power of it. The genesis of Had was years ago. Every now and then when I was still editing Hobart, I would like have a night home alone. And because I'm a weird sicko editing writer dork, like sometimes my idea of a fun time would be reading a bunch of submissions. And so there would be nights where my wife at the time was maybe out of town and I was a couple drinks in and was like, oh, it would be fun to read a bunch of submissions and just read them as fast as possible. But that felt unfair to submissions that were already in the submission queue because like that style of reading wasn't really what they had signed up for. But I reasoned that if I was upfront and just told people, and so I literally just tweeted, I was like, okay, I'm 2 beers in or 2 whiskeys in and probably about to pour a third. And I'm going to read a bunch of submissions right now and respond with a knee-jerk opinion as fast as possible. So then they kind of like knew who and the context of what they were submitting to. And it ended up being really fun and kind of would be just a thing. It's kind of, I would often like tweet my way through it in the era of more fun Twitter and live tweeting things and it not being such a cesspool and just being more of a fun community place. And so every now and then I would do that. And then at some point I reached out to Crow and was like, what if we kind of build this offshoot journal that is all that style submission call? But I guess what happened was because I was reading as fast as possible and maybe not 100% clear headed always, the stuff that was sharpest and real short and often maybe kind of like weird or especially surprising in some way is what grabbed my attention, right? A maybe slower, more meandering 2,000 word story. It's like, I'm just not going to slowly read this and spend time considering it right now. I want to read that first paragraph or two and be like, yes or no. And so that process itself ended up then kind of guiding and creating that Had kind of energy and vibe and kind of style of writing a little bit.
We talk a lot about voice on here and trying to discover your voice and kind of getting that sensation that you have inside of you of like, that's exactly what I want to say. That's exactly how I see it. It must be, you just mentioned that when you first started from Hobart into Had, kind of finding pieces that had that sort of like those elements. Is it interesting to have some, your own voice from writing longer pieces, from writing, Year of the Buffalo, Tacoma that's coming out this month. But there's also, you're listening to a voice that's telling you this is a piece that goes in Had. Can you talk about that, if that's not too vague a question?
A little bit. I think there's a couple things. I think one is just that, like, what is popping to me immediately? It is a real thing that I'm looking for when I'm reading a Had submission. And sometimes if I'm trying to write something a little bit more like that, it is that real emphasis on how do I delete sentences 2 and 3 and jump from 1 to 4 in a way that feels surprising and maybe as tight and sharp as possible. And how do I say the thing that surprises and just grabs you, right? I am at times like a fan of a real slow story and a quiet story, but I think often that's just not really what I'm looking for Had. I think because it's a journal born out of social media and at the time kind of Twitter especially, although now a little bit more Blue Sky and Instagram, I think sometimes, not always, but a part of my brain when reading is sort of like, does this feel social media grabby? Which on the one hand is kind of a bullshit way of thinking about literature, but then also feels like a fitting way of thinking about this, 250 word short. It's like, can I see it grabbing people the way that I'm wanting it to grab me as a reader?
So does the story have to have a complete movement, beginning, middle, and end? I've read quite a number of pieces from Had, and many of them feel like almost snapshots or interrupted moments. Give us a sense, and I'm assuming, I'll put words in your mouth, that you're looking for something that's just going to grab you, and whether it is or isn't doesn't really matter. But I'm just curious, like as people are trying to find new things to read, or as writers are trying to figure out, what's the secret sauce? What's that? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I think this is so mysterious and subjective and hard, if not impossible, at least for me to define. But a kind of, I know it when I see it. Like, I do want the piece to feel complete, right? Which I guess usually, if not always, means there's at least an implied beginning, middle, and end, even if it is such a short burst or a snapshot. But I think there's something there about, that difference between like anecdote and story, and how to do that. And, some of my favorite pieces on the site are maybe a sentence or two, but have still been able to capture that something about them feels complete and not just like an excerpt of something that should or needs to be longer. This isn't totally an answer to that, and maybe is a little truer for longer stories, but something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is I want a story. I want it to surprise me as the reader, but I also feel like I can often tell whether or not it ever surprised the writer while they were writing it. And I think a lot of pieces that don't totally work don't have that, right? I think a story often finds another gear or levels up when you can almost tell, like, oh, the writer didn't know that was going to happen next, or that the story was going to go there. Again, maybe that's not always true for a 100 word micro, but I don't know. That's just one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, where I feel like a story can just feel a little flat because it almost is too much on the page what the author wanted to put on the page.
Yeah.
And I think that real magic happens when there's some kind of discovery in the process itself.
Let me peel that onion a little bit. Are you thinking, I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding you. Is it the point of view character has some sort of revelation, or you're really kind of seeing the hand of the author in the work and going, they didn't really know that was going to happen, did they?
I think it can be either and can kind of be anything, but I think, and this gets into such like hippy dippy magical woo woo shit, but like, I think when the writing is going well, it just takes on a form of its own. And I think sometimes as writers, as humans, we can resist that or not be open to it. Or not be willing to follow that and just be like, no, like the story that I wanted to write was this. And it feels like more often than not, when a story is working, it's like, what about if you go over here? And sometimes it's a point of view thing. Sometimes it's a plot thing. Sometimes, it's like a time jump or whatever. But it does feel like often there's this doorway of like, well, you didn't know this freeway exit was going to be here. But it is. And sometimes the writer's like, yeah, but I don't want to take it. I'm barreling toward my destination.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. That freeway exit would have been really interesting.
Yeah. My predetermined ending is calling me. Right. But here's this really cool, other place that you probably could have gone, should have gone in many cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine as an editor, you see a lot of these pieces that are complete movements, but are incomplete artistically because they wrote past a better ending or they didn't take the road less traveled or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I'm projecting onto it like my own process to a degree, right? As writer and conflating reading somebody else's work and how I write. But it does feel like and I think every editor and every literary journal reader would say some version of this, is what happens is, and again, maybe this is a little less so from Had, where it's such a specific short micro voice. But especially in slightly longer stories, you just see a ton of submissions that are good. And you're like, there's nothing about this that's hollering out as a reason to reject it, but it also just didn't light me up as a reader. And so thinking about, I guess that's the thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially is how to take a good story that's well written and has all the pieces that it quote unquote should. And how do you find the potential magic in it, or how do you level it up?
Yeah. How does your voice stand out against the rest of the chorus? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that some of my favorite pieces in anything that I'll read, there's a certain element of playfulness almost that the piece will have, that kind of like, yeah, this is, the author's, it might be a piece that's very serious or deals with some topics that are, pretty heavy, but there's an element of play sometimes in shorter pieces that I feel like, oh, this author knows what they're doing. They're having a good time with it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's such a thing. I talk about this a lot, and I don't think every writer needs to have quote unquote fun while writing everything they write. But I think one of the ways that writing is talked about a lot is how hard it is, and this, like, how much of a struggle it was to bury your soul and like, and I think that's all true, but also I think when writing's going well, and sometimes even when you're writing about really hard things, there is a kind of joy or pleasure or fun to it. And so some of that is just my personality. I tend to lean toward and promote the lightheartedness over struggle. I think being open to that so few of us are making any money writing. Why are you doing it if not you're enjoying it?
Yeah. Aaron, over the last couple of episodes, we've been, and when I say we, I mean the royal we of me. I've been kind of struggling with the concept of relevance for fiction writing. It's my own personal problem that I'm working through, which is I want to do it, and I think that I should do it, but I am struggling when I write something to find the relevance in it, that I'll kind of have that immediate dopamine kick of having a new idea on paper, come back to it a day or two later and go, what is this? Why is this a thing? And so that's, it's almost like a record that keeps skipping and going back to the beginning. You ain't nothing but you. And that's my process. Help. Anyway, what I'm really trying to get at is, let's talk about, Tacoma, and let's talk about your work, but in the context of relevance, what is it that really got you locked in on your new book and say, this matters, this is important, I need to write this down, let's do this? Like, tell us about that part of your process.
No, it's a great question. And I think it's a really recognizable struggle and frustration. I think about it in two ways, and I often sometimes have to remind myself when I maybe start to go down similar paths, Art, of sort of like, what is the relevance? What does it matter? Who cares? Why am I doing this? And I come back to, and I talk a lot about kind of process over result. And I think one is I do try to work on projects and remind myself of the pleasure that the process itself gives me, that when I'm working on a story I'm excited about, there's a kind of joy in that. And I don't know, maybe I'm forcing the metaphor or the comparison, but I imagine there's something similar in acting, right? Where obviously such a huge aspect of that is you want a crowd, you want viewers, you want people there, but also it needs to be like, in the doing it itself needs to be kind of its own reward. So that's a piece of it. And then another piece of it is, and especially being like a independent small press author, like I haven't sold a ton of books. I don't have a ton of readers, right? But coming back to thinking about what it means to me to even have a smaller number of readers, but who really connect with it. And I do often and sometimes even explicitly remind myself of growing up and having a little bit of kind of like a punk rock background and thinking about what some of those bands meant to me, even though I was, one of 80 people in a crowd at a small show. And I think they changed my life and meant more to me, more than even Pearl Jam, who I was in love with. And so, I just wrote a small essay about Tacoma, kind of like wrestling with this too, of like that bigger and longer and more sales inherently doesn't mean better, although a human aspect of it makes you sometimes think that it is, right? And conflating the two. So with Tacoma, especially, like I really came back to in the moment, I was just kind of in the middle of a really joyful summer and phase in my life. And so I think I was trying to capture that on the page in a way that also was joyful and having a lot of fun. And I really specifically kind of had 2, 3, half a dozen readers in mind who over and over, I was like, I don't know if anything's going to happen to this project, but even if it doesn't, if I send them the Word doc, they're going to get a huge kick out of it. And that felt really kind of fulfilling and definitely really was quite the thrust to keep moving and being like, oh, how do I write the next chapter that's going to be weirder or more fun, or more of a surprising in a way that hopefully is going to excite them.
I hear you on that. Checking out the smaller show and having so much more fun with that because it just feels more intimate. And then when you transfer that into writing and you're sort of like, I just know that there have been a lot of times where I'm like, I think Art's going to really like this. And sometimes it feels better because, there's the old joke, you send something to your parents. It just seems like a stereotype where my mom's always like, I loved it. Mom, we were talking about your sickness. Yeah, but I loved it. It was so nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. But just a small side note, I really loved your piece in Pool Party, The Mall, because it was such a great nostalgia trip. And it also reminds me a lot of, I used to do a lot of improv theater based in Keith Johnstone, who was very much into the surreal of improv theater, a very Canadian way of talking about it. How much of your work, it seems very nostalgic, for example, that your piece, The Mall, how much of it is autobiographical? I mean, you were talking about being in a really great place for Tacoma, and then reading that, it sort of feels there's a lot of autobiographical elements to it. Can you tell us where you find the line between writing some fiction and then something that's a little bit more autobiographical?
Yeah, and it's a little bit all over the place. I think everything I write is probably starts with the autobiographical. I don't know, maybe that's a lack of creativity or something, but it's almost always, thing X happened in my life. How do I take that as an entry point or a jumping off point? And so almost everything starts there. Even the stories that are much more speculative or weirder are often like, here's a moment or a visual or something. And then from there, it's maybe turning the dial. And I've segued, or I don't know if segued, I've added nonfiction to my writing, again, in what feels like semi-recently, although I guess I've been writing nonfiction for 10 years probably. And so that is almost like, no dial. It's all like, okay, how do I just capture literally this experience I had artfully on the page? And then sometimes I'm turning the dial more and more on kind of weirder or more quote unquote fiction and kind of branching further and further and getting away from that original idea. Tacoma is interesting and was especially fun because it does kind of fall under this auto fiction genre in that it's about this couple, Aaron and his girlfriend Amber, who spend the summer in Aaron's childhood home of Tacoma. And I started it and wrote a bunch of it while I and my girlfriend Amber were spending the summer in in the Tacoma where I grew up. And so a lot of it was like, oh, literally, like, we went to the mall today. What do and Amber tried on jeans. What if I just sort of start there and write a story about that? But then the fun of Tacoma, and the mall is like a chapter in Tacoma, although an edited version of it published as the mall, it's much more like as short story. And so is a little less auto fictiony and more fictional. But I think pulling that into and building it out into a larger book was part of what was fun, of like, okay, here's this book that is about me and Amber, but a fictionalized version of us. And kind of a lot of the moments started with our day-to-day lives, but then also what is the most maybe quote unquote realistic or honest or true way to write about our trip to the mall, while also improv, like yes-anding the idea of what if there's a Being John Malkovich type tunnel in the back of Spencer Gifts that takes Aaron to the time travels, right?
Yes.
And so that became the real fun of that story, and Tacoma as a whole is there's like, Aaron goes on a hike through the forest, and these kind of three magical wizards appear and like ask him a riddle and teleport him. And one of his buddies comes to town riding an orca. And so it was so fun to be kind of like outlandish and over the top and kind of literally magical, while also kind of anchored to this real scenario in my life, and often wrestling in various ways, which is one of my most common themes anyway of nostalgia. And so, whenever I'm back in Tacoma, I find myself thinking a lot about being 15, but also what if there's literally a time traveling tunnel that takes my character back to when he was 15?
Yes. You teach out at the University of Michigan, and I'm a very big fan of routine, even though I can't stick with it. And I've worked at schools as well in different ways, which gave me that sense of routine that helped me in my writing. Do you have a kind of routine? What's your workflow like? Does school help you with it, or your job in general?
I'm not great at routine. I would probably, I think when the writing is going really well is when I'm most in my routine, and maybe writing every morning. I think that can be a challenge with school and the demands of it. And then also just my personality, and I'm kind of lazy and a procrastinator. And so I'm often kind of like, oh, I can write tomorrow. I really need to do this other thing. So I don't have much of a writing routine right now. My current kind of routine is just waking up early and having my coffee and reading a short story every morning, which is not writing, but I have found such a pleasurable kind of centering, nice, quiet way of starting my days. And then from there, I kind of segue into work usually. Tacoma, actually, I wrote most of it in the summer, so I wasn't teaching, and I did kind of like pretty much every day. I just sat at my computer while my girlfriend was working her remote job, and I think every day I would write 1,000 words. And so that's part of how and why that book happened so quickly. And it also just felt so good to be in that, day in, day out. It's like anything that you're keeping up with, right? I kind of hate running and hate working out and hate going to the gym, but also when I'm doing it every day or even 3 to 4 times a week, it feels good and less good than when I don't.
The thing about our show, we really do try to provide not educational value, but we just like tips and tricks, especially when we have notable authors and editors come on. And so I want to make sure that we have a chance for you to share the knowledge and the pearls of wisdom. I'm going to guess that you've read a lot of in progress or incomplete work, or things that are sort of marginal, that don't quite meet the standard. What are some things that our listeners, and I'm one of them, can avoid that you see pretty frequently that if you could wave a wand, you'd like to just do away with? Is there anything that kind of fits that bucket?
I mean, this is a little bit more abstract and also repetitive, but back to my thoughts about surprise is I think a lot of stories that I read that don't work, maybe in general, but especially as submissions, just feel like they fall a little flat, right? They feel like, there's not enough maybe like moving pieces or layers or dimensions to the story. And I think those often open up when you kind of like allow yourself to try something and then keep pulling that thread. Like just on like a real bare bones thing, I think I never reject a story because of too much dialogue, but I think too much dialogue in a story often signals a story that isn't working and is relying too much on just having the characters say everything and not the prose. There's probably a smarter way of saying that, but I feel like I've just, and I don't totally know why it is, but it just feels like it makes a story feel a little more beginnery in just, I've read so many submissions where I'll just hit a whole page of dialogue. And I mean, some people can make it work, and by no means is like a tell-all sign of something that doesn't work. But I think often it's like, oh, I need you to triangulate this. I need something also happening while they're talking. I need it to be more complicated than just the characters telling each other as excuse to tell me, the reader, about the plot.
Oh, right. Yeah. That walking nightmare of exposition where it's like, hello, Jeff. Let me tell you this thing you already know. Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed, and thank you for bringing that up, is that sometimes, not younger, but less experienced writers feel a compulsion to connect two scenes through what would maybe have actually occurred in real life rather than just jumping to the next scene. So it's like, well, I got to get them from the kitchen to the table. I got to get them from the table to the bedroom. It's like, nah, sometimes you don't. Like, just jump.
Yeah, just jump cut that. This isn't really like a what not to do, but as far as maybe quote unquote advice and coming back to your comment, Art, about maybe writing something and then coming back to it a day or two later, or sometimes even in the moment being frustrated with it is, and I have to remind myself of this constantly, and it's on my brain because it's one of the primary ways that I teach writing, but it's just this like explicit reminder and encourager to just get things down and allow something on the page to be quote unquote bad or for it to not be working. And I'm just such a big proponent of like, try to write through it. I think, writer's block in general, and then also sometimes frustration with writing can be because you're not getting something quite right, or you're not as happy with something as you want. And then you stop and you fixate on the frustration or that it isn't working. And I think instead try to write through that and like either often maybe, yes, it is bad, but if you keep going, it'll lead you to somewhere good, or this reminder that you can come back tomorrow or next week or whatever and make it better. And I'm saying that out loud to you because you asked for advice, but maybe also out loud as a reminder to myself, explicitly, like let this page or 2 pages or today's entire writing be bad, but get it down.
Yeah. Oh no, it's great advice. I've given that advice. I just don't take it. I mean, this is what's so frustrating about me. Let me just recline on the couch here for a minute. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've been telling other writers for 20 years, and I've been telling my students for 10 or 15, and that doesn't mean that I can always do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to your point, it's difficult, and sometimes you just don't want to do the hard thing. You don't want to go to the gym, et cetera. But I agree. And I think it's great advice, to just let the thing be a thing, no matter how ugly it is, because you can always come back and make it better. It's just it's almost like, all right, so here's how I think about it. And I'm not trying to convince anybody this is right. It's just, this is the problem in my head. When I start to pile up bad writing or writing that it sounds pretty, but I'm not really sure what it's doing. It almost feels like I'm shoveling mud into, the same spot. And so I'm sort of building this mountain, And then, okay, so now I've got a mountain of mud. It's like, oh no, but you didn't have that before. It's like, oh, yeah, but I don't want a mountain of mud. Like, what am I going to do with this? So, I mean, that's where I need to be thinking about, it's not mud, it's clay, and you have to form it. So like, anyway, thank you for helping me get to that, because I think that's going to help me build a better process going forward. So thank you.
So Aaron, is there, I know that Tacoma is the focus right now, but is there anything that's coming up next that you're thinking about, already kind of putting down on paper?
I mean, I have a couple of completed manuscripts that I am, trying to find homes for. And so it's weird because Tacoma happened so fast. I wrote it beginning to end, and it's a short book. But it just like came out of me so fast. And then I did a couple rounds of revision, but more fine tuning, and those happened pretty fast. I mean, the whole thing happened in, I don't remember. I did the math the other day, like 4 months, maybe 6 months. And it's coming out, and I'm excited about it coming out. And then meanwhile, I have this novel that I'm incredibly proud of that took, that I worked on for like 6 years, that still isn't out. And so there's this like wrestling in my brain of what it means that one happened faster than the other. And the faster one is the one that's coming out, and the other one is still sort of not. But I have that, which is a completed novel, a little bit circling back to the Brad album. It's set in the 90s, Pacific Northwest, a single night novel set at a youth group lock-in. And so I have that, which I'm really excited about. I have a story collection that I'm really proud of. And then coming back to some of the way that we're talking about writing and frustration art, I mean, I have 50, 75 pages of a new novel that I'm really excited about, but that I hit a wall on, and I need to force myself to just keep going, but I haven't been. And so that's just kind of sitting there. And as much as I kind of like what's on the page, I haven't quite been able to push myself. And so maybe my advice to you both and to any listeners will actually turn into just advice for myself for heading into February and making myself get back to this novel that's in progress.